Thank you so much, Shubha and Preeti, the organizers. I think it's extremely important to really talk about the changing the narrative from a feminist perspective because there's a lot written and a lot said about how climate change impacts women, and a lot of the countries are also coming up with policies. But I think changing the narrative is something that is really a bigger challenge. Since I'm the first speaker, let me just say things that all of you might probably know, to say that the BIMSTEC countries actually have to safeguard 22% of the world's population on 3% of geographical land. And also the fact that, considering that this particular area is called a world hazard belt with all the various disasters worsened by climate change, visiting it, especially, the looking at cyclones and tsunamis, floods, landslides, cloudbursts, droughts, so very different kinds, combinations, GLOF, which is the glacial lake outburst, heat, stress, sea ingress, and also the fact that a lot of the traditionally known disasters in areas are now giving way to new disasters. So flood-prone areas are, facing droughts, which are called meteorological droughts, basically where the rains are not coming on time, and so um, there's a bigger water crisis for food production, and also for drinking water and etc. So this particular area is really, really dynamic as far as climate impact is concerned. And the area is very highly vulnerable, is also seen by the fact that countries like Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, and Nepal really rank high on their on the national vulnerability index, if you look at it. And vulnerability index is a combination of the exposure that people have to different hazards, and also the capacity to deal with it. So that's what, combination of it really gives you the vulnerability index. Must say that BIMSTEC has realized very late in life, in 2022, to actually have a plan of action on environment and climate change. As Shubha rightly said, there's a Center for Weather and Climate in Noida, and Govindji will speak about the Energy Center in Bangalore. And the main focus of this particular plan is supposed to be biodiversity, waste management, and climate change, including disaster management. As far as I've been able to understand, there is no feminist perspective, there is no gender, there are no women. It's something that's left to national priorities, whatever the countries themselves would like to do. And so, it's extremely important to understand that if climate action, the narrative has to be feminist for climate action and climate policy, then what is it that the countries are doing? Because together, then they can actually learn from each other and build on each other. If you look at the countries, Nepal is very progressive as far as political participation of women, at least on paper, is there. At least they have 33% reservation in parliament. And I think 50% of the candidates need to be women, because even at the grassroots level, they have self-governance, which is where they have women representatives. India is, of course, now most of the states have 50% reservation for women in local self-governance bodies, in villages as well as in cities. And hopefully the bill on 33% of reservation in parliament will see the light of the day at some point in time, and overcome some of the obstacles to at least have more women in parliament. I think also the fact that Bangladesh has, I think, 50 seats reserved out of 300 in parliament for women. But Bhutan, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Thailand really have no such reservations. Now, why am I talking about this? Because to change the narrative, you need to change the narrative in the policies and at the political level, as well as have the wherewithal to change it at the local level. So I think that's something that's extremely important. So, for instance, if you look at the if you look at the narrative, how is it different from the North? So why is it important that we need to have more women in these positions? Most of the BIMSTEC countries, all of the BIMSTEC countries are basically agricultural societies. There is feminization of agriculture also in northern countries, but to a far lesser extent. I think women are in the front line when you're looking at the BIMSTEC countries far more than in the northern countries. And so they are the ones who really need to change the narrative. And they will be able to do so if they are in political positions at, on all the various tiers of governance. That is when they will be able to do it. So it's extremely important to have them there. And I think this is where if governments in BIMSTEC can actually highlight, and this is data that countries are already collecting. At least I know that Nepal has some collection of that. EC mode, for instance, when it participates, it gives examples from Nepal. India has examples that they've even got an award system where women are doing great things on environment and climate change. So at BIMSTEC level, if they start sharing this, then this is something that other countries will pick up. So I think that wherewithal, that positions of power is something that's extremely important. And countries which have it can then start actually helping other countries to build. And that is the only way the narrative will really change. Why I'm also saying it is, the next point that I really wanted to make out is that the narrative for the climate change, the policies, the Paris Agreement, it's all set on the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Now, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change doesn't do research on climate. It only pulls together what is already there in written form. Now, that's again where southern countries and BIMSTEC countries actually, are not represented. Because if you look at the assessment report 6, and now the assessment report 7 will be out, I think, in 2028. They've just, selected all the authors and the reviewers to review all the all the scientific literature which is out. There are several barriers. For AR6, the assessment report 6 that was out, about a third of the authors were women. Now it's apparently 43%. But countries in BIMSTEC are not represented. Southern countries are not represented. SIDS are also not represented. They're not part of BIMSTEC. But just to say that, so you have, say, about 2 dozen people from India, being a large country. You have about 2 dozen people from India. Some of them are women. You have maybe 2 or 3 from Bangladesh, from Nepal, Bhutan. I don't think there's any authors, no authors, and neither from some of the other BIMSTEC countries. So if you have nobody changing the narrative of the driving force for climate policy for the world, then it's really a very serious matter. The other thing is that the women who are there, to say, well, okay, some BIMSTEC countries, women are there, and so they should be able to, kind of change the narrative. There are again several barriers. Some of these women, and this is not a discrimination, a kind of, it's a bias which is felt by authors, and there are several studies on this. English. So if English is not, you're not good in English, then you're going to have a problem actually writing. And at the end of the day, some northern white man or a western white man is going to take up actual writing. So there are studies, scholarly studies, which are there on this. The second thing is just publications. We're in BIMSTEC also, a lot of our countries are oral tradition countries. We don't have things written. What is there is gray literature. So some of us have in the past fought to say that IPCC should also consider what is called gray literature. Gray literature is essentially reports, etc. But traditionally you only consider peer-reviewed literature, which is essentially in English. So you will not find it in Bangla or Hindi or any of Nepali or any of the other languages. That's a huge discrimination. So what knowledge are you really sharing with the world to form climate policies? So I think that's extremely important. And that brings me to my next point, is this whole thing about, the knowledge that people have. So women, like I said, are in the front lines. And what are the main sectors that are being really affected by climate change? So, it's agriculture, water, health. Those are kind of the main sectors. Agriculture, when I say agriculture, it's allied activities, and water and health. Those are kind of the main things. How much literature are we generating? Yeah, how many even gray literature are we really generating? There are policies that are there in some of the BIMSTEC countries like Sri Lanka and India, which are now trying to document some of the traditional knowledge, which women, which is really very rich among women, whether it's to do with agriculture, whether it's to do with health. We all listen, I mean, we've grown up, many of us have grown up with cool drinks, which will keep the heat out when we go out during the peak summer days, right? Now, that's things that have been passed down from our grandmothers. Then also the fact that I went for a holiday to the mountains, and I was talking to this girl who works in the hotel, and the kind of things she told me about, little things about the herbs and spices that they use, and the way they cook things and the way they preserve things. So the idea is that that is the only thing that's going to help people adapt. How do we tap that knowledge? Does so even the countries like Sri Lanka and India, which are now looking at traditional knowledge, it's still a challenge. So let me
Sorry,
end.
Aditi. Yeah, thank
Let me just end by saying that I think what is really, really kind of needed is that a this knowledge needs to be documented, and B, some of these actions, because a lot of the women are doing what is called organic agriculture, eco-friendly agriculture. They are the ones who have the knowledge. They are the ones who are doing much more work, etc. That actions need to be codified, and the kind of sustainable development goals, achievements on health, etc., which the women have, that needs to be also codified. They need to inform the local adaptation plans that the countries are making. And so the only way to change the narrative is to have more women in political positions, to showcase what they have, to focus on some of the traditional knowledge that's there, and then to also try and change the narrative at the top by making sure that a lot of this can be written, recorded, podcast, whatever, and pursue the IPCC to also look at these things. It's not yet looking at podcasts, etc., reels. Whereas I think that's the easiest way, for BIMSTEC country women to actually record what they want to record, right? It's very friendly to oral tradition. So I think those are areas that we as women should really emphasize to move forward. Thanks.